योगेन चित्तस्य पदेन वाचाम् मलं शरीरस्य च वैद्यकेन योपाकरोत्तं प्रवरं मुनीनां पतञ्जलिं प्राञ्जलिरानतोऽस्मि आबाहुपुरुषाकारं शङ्खचक्रासिधारिणं सहस्रशिरसं श्वेतं प्रणमामि पतञ्जलिम् गुरुर्ब्रह्मा गुरुर्विष्णुर् गुरुर्देवो महेश्वरः गुरुः साक्षात् परब्रह्म तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः हरिः ओम्। So we have been discussing at a broader level different theories related to the nature of reality and the nature of knowledge of the reality, where the real, what we call as real objects, existing objects, they are referred to as artha, and the knowledge of them referred to as jnanam. And there have been different schools of thought being refuted, being discussed and then refuted, and the thought as per the Yoga Shastra being established. So in the previous session, we saw 4.15, which said vastu samye chitta bhedat tayoho vibhaktah panthaha, which says that there is a common thing, common entity, common object being perceived, but the perceiving chittas are different, belong to different beings, and there is a discussion on this. And then it says, therefore, they have their own separate independent paths. So the existence of something in reality is a completely independent aspect from the knowledge of the thing by a chitta, whether it is there or not, which chitta is cognizing it, etc. Those are two entirely independent things. The object will continue to exist, the chitta will perceive it or not perceive it depending on the situation, and so on. So that was 4.15, and there were some quite interesting aspects in the Bhashya that came about, which we covered. So along the same lines, now we continue on 4.16. And before the sutra, Vyasa has a couple of introductory lines bringing the subject matter into focus. So Vyasa says, Kechad ahuhu, which means some people say, Jnana sahabhuhu eva artho bhogyatvat sukhadivat iti. So it says, some people say that Jnana sahabhuhu eva arthaha. So the thing in existence, so to speak, is always existing in parallel to the jnanam. Sukhadivat, similar to sukha, etc. Bhogyatva, because it is something to be experienced, because it is bhogya. Now, incidentally, this framing of this sentence, which is jnana saha bhuva eva arthaha bhogyatva sukhadivat. This is a classic template in the Nyaya Shastra for any Anumana Vakyam, where there are different aspects, Pratiknya and Udaharanam, Drishtanta specifically. So there's a specific format of the sentence which has been adopted here to formally state, just like a mathematical equation, there is a specific form in which normally an equation will be written, known as the canonical form and so on. So for any inference, claim of inference, there is a specific format in which the sentence is written. And interestingly, this sentence that we just saw it is in that format. Okay, so there is something I just wanted to bring out. Anyway, so what is the sentence? The sentence is Jnana sahabhu eva artha bhogyatvat sukhadivat. So firstly, there is the claim. What is the claim? The claim is that artha, the things in existence, are jnana sahabhu. They exist along with jnanam and not without jnanam. So the existence in some sense is then depending on jnanam also existing. So that is the first part of the anumana vakyam. Anumana means inference. Now next is the hetu. Why is this claim being made? What is the cause? So it says bhogyatvat. Because the artha, the thing in existence, is bhogya. Bhogya means it can be experienced through perception, etc. Okay. So what, just because it is bhogya, why does it mean that it has to be sahabhuhu? Why does it have to exist concurrently? So for that, a drishtanta is given. Drishtanta means illustration. Another example that says because in that case it is so, in this case also it will be so. So this is similar to the classical example is Parvato Vanniman Dhumat Yata Mahanase, if I remember right. It says that there is fire on the hill because there is smoke, similar to how it is in the kitchen stove. Okay, so another classical example. So here it is said the entity exists along with the knowledge because it is something that is experienced, similar to the case as sukha. Okay. So this is another school of thought that Vyasa is bringing about. And just to understand it better, so the sukha, let's say sukha means joy, pleasure, etc. It exists, but only when it is being experienced. When one is not experiencing sukha, then you can say there is no sukha that exists. Which means the existence of sukha depends on it being experienced at the time. Now sukha is an object of experience. Now the claim is, similarly, other entities in the world are also an object of experience. Now just like sukha only exists so long as it is being experienced, then other entities of the world also exist only so long as there is jnana of it, means somebody is cognizing it. Otherwise there is no existence. Okay. So this is slightly different from the previous sutra, where another thought was refuted, where it was said that the jnana produces the entity. But here it is not saying produces, it is saying but both exist together. And the example uses that of sukha, where the experience of the sukha and the existence of sukha are related. So here it is saying all objects in the creation, the existence of them is related to there being jnana of them. Otherwise, those things don't exist. So that is the opinion under discussion. Hopefully that is clear. So Vyasa says, Te etaya dvara sadharanatvam badhamanaha purvottareshu kshaneshu vastu swarupam eva apannuvate. Vyasa is commenting, he is saying, people who think like this, through this kind of thought, they are rejecting sadharanatvam. What is sadharanatvam? Sadharanatvam means pramatrubhedepi samyam ekatvam. So sadharanatvam is common existence, which regardless of the pramatru, regardless of who is perceiving it, there is a common existence, samyam, common similar existence. Or even when different people perceive it, there is a common form of existence. So that is sadharanatvam, existence in itself. So Vyasa is saying, these people are refuting such an existence. When purvottareshu kshaneshu means in the moment before the cognition and moment after the cognition, they are refuting the common existence. And by doing that, vastu swarupam eva apannuvate. They are rejecting that a thing has an essential form. That very notion they are rejecting. Okay? So this is Vyasa's elaboration of the consequence of the thought that says jnana sahabhuhu eva arthaha. So that is, Vyasa makes it clear that by doing that, you are actually rejecting that anything has its essential swarupa, essential form, in the moments before and after the cognition. Okay, so now comes the Sutra 4.16, which is then codifying this opposition to this kind of school of thought in the Yoga Shastra by saying, so this is how the Sutra goes, न caikacittatantraṃ vastu tadapramāṇakaṃ tadā kim syāt. So it says, na caikacittatantraṃ vastu, means the Yoga Shastra says no, the vastu or a thing is not dependent on one chitta or the cognition by some chitta. Now why? Further the sutra says, tad apramāṇakaṃ tadā kim syāt. It says, when it is not being cognized, then what will happen? Okay, so that is the meaning of the sutra itself. It says, na caikacittatantraṃ vastu. The thing is not dependent on perception via a chitta, because when it is not being perceived, then what will happen to it? Yes, so na caikacittatantraṃ vastu tat apramāṇakaṃ tadā kim syāt. So that is the background to 4.16 and the Sutra 4.16. Next we'll be looking at the Vyasa's Bhashya on the Sutra.
So we are in an interesting topic in the fourth chapter here. It is considering, it is having on the anvil the position of panpsychists. We have some philosophers who are panpsychists from classical times, and even today in modern times. There are some people who have something to substantiate their stand. What is their stand? The objective world outside us is a mind fabrication. The common man thinks that these are objects of certain material. This is cat, this is rat, this is mountain, this is river, this is sun, this is moon. So we know that there is a matter which is constituting the objects outside, and object is a material reality outside. But there is a lot of intellectualism in postulating panpsychism from classical times and even today. Even modern philosophers are embracing panpsychism, and they have quite a strong position, that all these physical objects are mind fabrications. So in classical philosophies, we had something which was called Vijñānavāda in Buddhism. Buddhism has some branches, and one of the branches is called Vijñānavāda. The Vijñānavādins are panpsychists. They say all these objects are unreal and they are mental fabrications. And then coming to our times, we have today modern philosophers who advocate or who embrace or who postulate, who substantiate the standpoint of panpsychism. And say even with the help of neurology and psychology, they have postulated this. So suppose there is a rose as an object in front of us, say in a vase or on a plant. We say this is a rose. Now we don't actually denote the rose in a cognition. This is a rose, which is on a plant or which is on a vase. We actually refer to the rose, which is a mental object in the brain. This is with reference to visual perceptions. in visual perceptions, they postulate something as apperception. So the rose outside, the light rays get into our eyes, then it is caught by retina, and then from retina it is projected into the brain, and then there is a configuration of rose or figuration of rose in the brain, and we refer to that rose in our gray matter. When we have cognition, this is a rose. So with all those sensory perceptions that we have, 5 kinds, they are gotten into the brain and they have some kind of impulse, impact, or some projection, or some kind of figuration of objects. And we refer to that in our perception. This is the standpoint of modern neurologists who say that the object in the brain is it is the substrate for our cognition, not the physical object outside. And that is why the panpsychism has been still advocated by even modern time scientific-minded philosophers. So they describe the whole phenomenon in the brain and human neurology and psychology. So Vyasa here has also brought this kind of enunciation to Sutra, Kechitahu, some people say. There's coexistence of our knowledge of object and experience of object. There is absolute coexistence. Simultaneously they are there. And therefore there is basis to really argue whether it is the knowledge of the object is the substrate for declaring physical reality or the very object. Now the object might be out there, but if the brain is in unconscious state, it won't be registering. So despite the object present, there will be no knowledge of object. And if there is no knowledge of object, one will tend to refuse the existence of object. There is basis to refute existence of object because it is not cognized. So there are certain strong positions to postulate this panpsychism, and they have gone a long way to substantiate their stance. So here, therefore, we come to a very interesting sutra, and it's a unique sutra in the sense it is interrogative sutra. A sutra in the form of interrogation. Patanjali himself is putting a question, and the putting a question is actually a way to refute the panpsychism. So it's very interesting kind of sutra that has come. He is not asking a question to you and me, but with a form of interrogative form of statement, Patanjali is refuting the standpoint of panpsychism. So sometimes we have an interrogative statement to refute the stand of opponent who in front of us. So that's why it's a very interesting sutra that we are encountering. You heard the sutra just now. So the sutra says that when the vastu, the object, if it is chittadhina, it is dependent upon the chitta. When there is no cognition, there should be no object. What will happen to object if there is no cognition of the object? Because we won't have cognition unless the object is registered in the brain or creates some kind of configuration or some kind of impulse or some kind of depiction. So he puts a question: if you are right, panpsychist, when there is no pramanam, jnanarup pramana, when therefore the object is not grasped, then what happens to the object? Is the object gone from the sight? Is the object not there? So that means he is trying to refute the panpsychism in an interrogative statement. So this is not actually a question that he is putting, but in a in interrogative form of the statement, he is refuting it strongly. So that's how the sutra has come, and as I say, it's quite an interesting sutra. Okay.
Now Vyasa begins. He says, caikacittatantraṃ chet vastu syāt tadā citte vyagre niruddhe va swarupam eva tena aparāmrishtam anyasya avishayi-bhūtam apramāṇakaṃ agruhītasvabhavakam kenachit tadānim kim tat syāt. Vyasa is elaborating and expanding the sentence of the sutra. He is saying, caikacittatantraṃ ched vastu syāt. If the existence of an entity is along with, concurrent with one chitta and the cognition of that vastu by the chitta, then when that chitta is busy elsewhere, that is known as vyagre. So the chitta is busy elsewhere. Or niruddhe, it is niruddha state, it has restrained all perceptions. Then swarupam eva tena aparāmrishtam. Then the swarupa, the very form and existence of the thing, is now not being perceived or grasped or cognized by the chitta. Anyasya avashayi-bhūtam apramāṇakaṃ agruhītasvabhavakam. So it is not cognized by any chitta, not grasped by it, etc. So one chitta is busy, another chitta, let's say, is niruddha, and no other chitta is cognizing it. Tadānim kim tat syāt. In that case, what happens with respect to that thing, that entity? Sambadhyamanam cha punah chittena kuto utpadyet. So now there is a different question. Firstly, when somebody stops perceiving it, no chitta is perceiving it, what happens to that thing? The next question is, when chitta once again starts perceiving it, from where is it coming back? So something that has completely gone away, because no chitta was perceiving it. When the chitta again begins to perceive it, from where has it come forth again? So punaschitena kuta utpadyeta. So ye cha asya anupasthita bhagaha te cha asya na syuhu. So now this is a third point. The parts of the thing that are not being cognized. For example, if I am standing in front of you and you are looking at my face and the frontal body, the other parts are not being seen. Then, by this theory, the other parts do not exist. Because techa anupasthita bhagaha, not being perceived and therefore not being present, then they won't be there. Evam nasti prishtham iti udaram api na gruhyeta. So if the back is not seen, the stomach is not seen, does it mean it does not exist at all? So that is the bhava, that is what is being asked. So there are three different types of questions and discussions. The first is, if something was being perceived, somebody stops, or no chitta perceives it anymore, where does it go? What happens to it? Second, something that was not being perceived, now once again it starts getting perceived. From where did it come back? Out of the blue. Because as we know, the Sankhya Yoga doesn't even accept something can be created out of the blue, because of the Satkaryavada. And the third thing is, okay, if some parts of a thing is being perceived and other parts are not, then those other parts, the backside, etc., then they do not exist at all. So all of this, in Vyasa's view, Patanjali's view, does not make sense. So tasmat swatantro arthaha sarva purusha sadharanaha. Therefore they say arthaha, the thing that can be known, the knowable objects, they are swatantra. They have their own independent existence. Sarva purusha sadharanaha. available to be known by all purushas, equally available to be known. And that is why when I said earlier, before the sutra, what is sadharanatvam? It says pramatru bhedepi samyam ekatvam sadharanatvam. Even when the cognizers are different, but it is known in the common way, that is the sadharanatvam. That is a common, same, equal existence, independent. Therefore, here also Vyasa is saying, Swatantro artha sarva purusha sadharanaha. The artha or the knowable entities, their existence is independent and equally knowable by all purushas. Swatantrāni ca cittāni pratipurusham pravartante. Further, Vyasa is making it clear that chittas are also swatantra, means they are not dependent on the knowable objects. So if a chitta was looking at a rose through the chakshu, through the eyes, etc., it is knowing the rose, just like the existence of the rose is not dependent on the chitta, similarly the chitta, existence of the chitta is also not dependent on the rose. In that sense, it is swatantra. So swatantrāni ca cittāni pratipurusham pravartante. With each chitta, with each purusha, the corresponding chitta exists. Pratipurusham pravartante. Tayoho sambandhat upalabdhi purushasya bhogeti. So when the chitta and the artha come into connection, one way or the other, that is when there is upalabdhi. There is the purusha's bhoga, the experience arises. Okay. So Vyasa makes the yogic stance clear. So the stance of the Yoga Shastra on this question is made clear, which is that the things in the world have their independent existence. The chitta has its independent existence, and when they come into contact, which here it is as sambandha, it gives rise to bhoga, experience with respect to the purusha. So purushasya bhoga. So in the end, chitta is just an instrument. It is jada. It is a material entity. So the actual experiencer, the actual bhoga is of the purusha. So purushasya bhogasya upalabdhihi. That is what happens when the chitta comes into contact with an independently existing object. So that is 4.16, where the understanding or the position of the Yoga Shastra, often gets more clearer, the understanding, when the opposite points of view are analyzed and then discarded. So that is what is happening in this series of sutras. And this is 4.16 along with the Bhashya.
So Vyasa is substantiating position of Patanjalas who do not accept panpsychism, that is, objects are mental fabrications, the position that objects are mental fabrications. And here, a very interesting example has been given that when we are citing an object, the objects which are the three-dimensional, we don't see that dimension of the object, because something which is front of the object and back of the object. So when you are looking at the top of the object, you don't see the bottom of the object. When you see the front of the object, you don't see the back of the object. So if you don't see it, it should be deemed that it is not existent. Like you heard the example that Srineet gave just now. If you are looking at a person, looking at the anterior of the person, you don't sight the posterior. You don't grasp the posterior of the person. So in that case, are you going to believe that there is no posterior to the person and only anterior to the person? So that is bizarre. So that's how the position has been explained out for the stand that Patanjalas have taken, that the objects have their reality, physical reality, and they are not mental fabrications as the Vijnanavadins put it. But then they have another doubt for questioning Patanjalas. They say, okay, if that is the case, that objects are ever existent, that they are independent of your psyche, independent of our chitta, independent of independent of anybody's chitta. They have their own existence. Our chitta too is independent of the objects. Then in that case, are the objects Jada Swarupa or Prakasha Swarupa? Now, if they are Jada Swarupa, that is inert, then they should never be object of knowledge. And if they are Prakasha Swarupa, they should never cease from our cognition. They should be constantly being seen. So, this is how they are trying to provoke the Patanjalas to depart from their stance. And that's why these are all called Pakhandis. That means the opponent who are heterodox in their thought systems. So that's how the question is put, and the answer is going to come in the following sutra. So anyway, the point is, the object, if it has its own existence, it should be all the time object of our knowledge. But sometimes we have knowledge, sometimes we don't have knowledge. You heard just now, if the mind is engaged somewhere else, then you don't see the object, that object. Now, it doesn't see its existence, but because only your mind is engaged in some other object, some other experience, and therefore the object goes unsighted. Or when the mind is restrained, what happens? Does the object go away? If the object goes away, if it comes back again, from where does it come? So these are the strong objections taken by Patanjalas, which are actually irrefutable. They cannot be easily refuted. And this is how the Patanjalas substantiate their stand. As you heard, that objects don't come from some out of blue. They have to exist in some form or the other. And then they will be objects for our grasp or perceptions, or may not be, but yet existing. They have their independent existence. This is the position of Sankhyas. They will exist in some form or the other. When the rose doesn't exist, it might be existing in a form of plant or in a form of sapling or in a form of seed, but it does exist in some form or the other. So, the Satkaryavada, as you just now heard from Srineet, so these are the positions which are quite formidable positions, and Patanjalas are presenting their standpoint. And in the process of postulating their standpoint, they are refuting the opponent's views such as panpsychism, Vijnanavada, Drishti Srishtivada, etc., which are existent in philosophical systems. Anyway, this was an interesting sutra. But the topic is continuing because the objection has been raised. Why, if the object is existent, why is it that it's not all the time cognized? Sometimes cognized, sometimes not cognized. So why is it? So how they are trying to bring the relationship between the chitta and the object. If there is no relationship with both are independently there, then they should exist. And in that case, the chitta should be always citing it, and chitta cannot be escaping it. So this is a position that these philosophers had to answer the standpoints taken by philosophers such as Patanjalas. And the answer is coming in the next sutra. Okay.
Just as a small aside, it just reminded me. So when these discussions happen where each is putting their own point of view, so there are three terms used again in the Nyaya Shastra: Vada, Jalpa and Vitanda. All these are known as kathas. So Vado, Jalpo, Vitanda ityetatrayam militva katha iti kathayanti. So what is the difference between Vada, Jalpa and Vitanda? So Vada is kevalam tattva nirnayartham chalamana charcham vadakatha iti kathyate. So an argument, in order to arrive at the final position, final stand, arrive at the truth, that is known as vada. Now, वादि प्रतिवादिनो विजयाकांक्षिणो पारितोषिककांक्षिणो वा भूत्वा वेगेन क्रियमाणां स्वपक्षसाधनरूपां तथा परपक्षखण्डनरूपां च चर्चा जल्पकथा. So vada is, there is an argument in order to identify and arrive at a common position or arrive at the truth. Jalpa means an argument being made to defeat the opponent and make one's own stand as a victorious stand. The argument purely for that purpose is known as jalpa. It is interesting how different, from very long time this has been analyzed, and there are specific terms being ascribed to different kinds of argument. So this is the second one, which is about defeating the other and making one's own stand victorious. So that is jalpa. The third is vitanda. Now vitanda means स्वपक्ष समर्थनेन विना केवलं परपक्षनखण्डनरूपां चर्चां वितण्डकथा इति कथयन्ति. So in the vitanda, see, one's own position is also not established. It is purely the criticism of the other's position, and that is all that is happening in the argument, where it's all about why it says you are wrong without trying to say what is right. So purely that kind of argument is known as vitanda. So this discussion just reminded me that in these different positions and philosophical discussions, etc., there is a certain structure on how these debates happen, and also a categorization based on how what is the type of argument the opponent is putting forth. Okay. Now coming back to the text, as was said, what is the real position as to how the artha and knowledge comes about. So that is Sutra 4.17, that says taduparāgāpekṣitvāccittasya vastu jñātājñātam. So now the final stand is being put forth, that jñāta and agnāta, known and unknown, how does that come about with respect to an entity or vastu? That is taduparāgāpekṣitvāccittasya. So now the chitta is, uparaga means, the literal translation would be, it's like it is colored. Okay, so it comes into contact and therefore it gets colored by it. So the nature of the chitta is, it has an apeksha. It is such that there is the nature is that it has the potential to be colored by an object, and that can happen through, as we know, pramana, viparya, vikalpa, etc. So the coloring may be because of direct perception, it could be due to an invalid perception, it could be due to a valid inference, and any of these things. But the chitta gets colored by the knowable, and then that knowable is therefore known to the chitta or not known to the chitta, depending on whether the chitta is colored by it. So taduparāgāpekṣitvāccittasya vastu jñātājñātam. That is Sutra 4.17. It is a nice but small, brief bhashya. Again, an analogy, nice analogy being used by Vyasa. So Vyasa says, ayaskantamanikalpa vishaya ayasadharmakam chittam abhisambadhyoparanjayanti. So the vishayas means those things that are perceived by the chitta. So all entities, because they carry the properties of shabda, sparsha, rupa, rasa, gandha, they can therefore come into contact with the chitta. And all these vishayas, they are like magnets. Ayaskantamanikalpa. So ayaskantamanikalpaha vishayaha. So they are all like magnets. Ayasadharmakam. The chitta is as though it is made up of material which can be attracted by a magnet. So let's say the chitta is something made up of iron filings or iron. So when the chitta comes into the influence or the magnetic field of a entity which is like a magnet, when the chitta is in its field, the chitta feels its influence. So that is uparanjanam. So the chitta feels the influence, and when the chitta feels its influence, then that thing becomes known to the chitta, that is jñātam. So yena cha vishayena uparaktam chittam savishayo jñātah tato anyah punah ajñātah. So whatever by whichever vishaya the chitta has become colored or influenced, yena cha vishayena uparaktam chittam, then that vishaya or that object of the senses or of the chitta is said to be known to it. So sa vishayah jñātah. Jñātah means known. Tato anyah, anything other than that, punarajñātah, is unknown. So known or unknown depends on whether the chitta is colored by it or not. Vastunah jñātājñātasvarupattvāt pariṇāmitvam. And because the chitta comes under the influence of these vishayas, and then they become, the chitta's very nature is to have vastus or jñāta or ajñāta, known or unknown. Therefore, the chitta is pariṇāmi. The chitta undergoes transformations because it is getting influenced and colored by things, and therefore those things are become part of the known or unknown with respect to the chitta. Therefore, chitta is very, very much pariṇāmi, a changing object, a transforming object. Very briefly, the process of chitta's operation with respect to knowing or not knowing, which is the key role of chitta as an instrument, has been clearly clarified in the sutra and the bhashya.
So just as you heard just now about vada, jalpa, vitanda, sometimes there is cavil. So sometimes the objection that was raised here was of the nature of cavil and or perversion. So that with the help of cavil and perversion, they try to torment the opposite philosophers. They don't try to prove that their position is right, but they only go on criticizing the other position, which by saying it is wrong, but they don't say what is right. So these are various kinds which come in debates called, as you heard, Vad, Jalpa and Vitanda. So what we were encountering was a kind of Jalpa. One of the Jalpa or Vitanda was that the object should be ever visible if it is Prakasha Swarupa and should never be visible if it is Jada Swarupa. Why is that sometimes we know the objects and sometimes we do not know the object? It is taduparāgāpekṣitvāccittasya. The chitta has a nature of getting colorized. Ayaskanta manikalpaha, and we have seen during the vritti saropyamitara sutra the nature of chitta. So when we are looking at the top of the object, we don't see the bottom of the object. But there is no position to say that the object doesn't have a bottom. We can turn it, flip it, and we can sight the bottom of the object. If you are sighting the anterior of the object, there is no way to postulate that have a position, that there is no posterior to the object. We can flip it, turn it around and see the posterior of the object. Now what is this? How does the knowership and non-knowership come about? We know something about the object, we do not know something about the object. Our perception, we don't have three-dimensional perceptions. Like when you see the front of the object, you don't sight the back of the object. So other side of the object is never sighted. There's always other side of the object which is never sighted. If you sight the bottom, you don't sight the top. If you sight the top, you don't sight the bottom. So there is always a combination of something known, perceived, and something not known and perceived. So the object is an independent entity, but you can't expect that because it's a reality, it should always be luminous for us, our cognitions. So sometimes we do know, sometimes we do not know. Because that knowing or non-knowing depends upon, it is related to uparaga. So wherever the chitta is uparaga, it will know. When it is not having uparaga, it will not know. So the knowledge is always, the empirical knowledge is always a combination of I know and I don't know of an object. So always you know the part of the object and not the whole of the object. So how does this come about? Something is known and something is not known. It depends upon uparagatvam, chitta uparaga. So wherever chitta is colorized, to the extent it is colorized, there is a perception cognition. Wherever it is not colorized, there is no perception cognition, although it exists. This is the position of Patanjalas. So the point is, our empirical knowledge is never knowledged per se. It is always a combination of something known, something unknown. The combination of jnanam, ajnanam, jñātātāṃ, ajñātāṃ is always a combination in empirical perception. And therefore, if you recall, the samadhi perception was discussed and we were told that it is all dimensional knowledge. There is never a partial aspect known and partial aspect unknown. That is why it is called sampragnata samadhi, sampragnanam. So it is all dimensional. But our empirical perceptions are always combination of which can be declared as I know, I don't know. I know when I see the posterior, at the same time, I do not know about the anterior. If the anterior is a knowable object, I know it, then posterior is not known. So in a way, empirical perception, there is always a combination of something about that object you know and something about that same object you do not know. So for you to know the whole object, you will have to turn it around in 360 degrees and then you will say, I will know. But at the same time, you will not know something at a point in time. If you know a dimension of an object, other dimension of the object is always unknown in empirical process. That is why in intuitive mysticism we have sampagnanam, where you will not have such a condition. So the point is, argument was, how is it either we should not know or we should know. Jadavat, we should not know. Prakashavat, we should always know. Now, why is it that we sometimes know and sometimes do not know? It depends upon chitta getting colorized. So, beautiful example Vyasa has brought in here. Ayaskanta panikalpa. Object is independently existing on its own, but the knowledge of it will depend upon chitta getting colorized. To the extent it is colorized, it will be object knowable or known. To the extent not colorized, it will be unknown, unknowable during that time. So, knowledge depends upon chitta getting colorized. And therefore, chitta is described in the philosophy of yoga, Patanjala, as ayaskanta manikalpa. So that's how that cavily is also answered by this sutra. Okay.
So now we just saw that the chitta undergoes changes. It is a parinami because things are known or unknown depending on whether the chitta is colored by them. On the other hand, comes the next sutra. On the other hand, yasya tu tadeva chittam vishaya tasya, Vyasa says, on the other hand, with respect to that thing, for whom that very chitta is the Vishaya, one who knows that chitta, with respect to him, which means with respect to that. So we are talking about the Purusha here. With respect to Purusha or Chiti Shakti, etc. With respect to the Purusha comes Sutra 4.18. It says, sadā jñātāścittavṛttayastatprabhoḥ puruṣasya apariṇāmitvāt. So, sadā jñātāः, always known. What is always known? Cittavṛttayaः, all the chittavrittis. With respect to whom? Tadā puruṣasya. The Prabhu, the Lord, the Purusha, who is, as we know, swam bhavati puruṣasya swāmiṇah. So with respect to the chitta, the Purusha is the Lord. The chitta is the swam. It is a sort of something owned by, sort of the property of the Purusha. So the Prabhu, with respect to the Prabhu, the Lord, the Purusha, the chittavrittis are always known. Apariṇāmitvāt, because the as opposed to the chitta, the Purusha is eternally unchanging, ever unchanging, always the same, non-transformative, absolutely no transformation. So apariṇāmi. And apariṇāmitvāt, so therefore the chittavrittis, because the chitta is the Vishaya for the Purusha. And for the chitta itself, other things are Vishaya and they will color or not color, it come and go, and the chitta is ever changing. On the other hand, chitta as the Vishaya is always in the focus, or always known to the Purusha, and Purusha is unchanging, and therefore the chittavrittis are always known to it. Okay, so that is the sutra. Again, it is a this again we have to realize is giving very different and deep insights on the knowledge process and the difference in the knowledge process with respect to the chitta and with respect to the Purusha. And this can be seen in both ways. We can look at it as, because the Purusha is said to be unchanging, this is how the sutra puts it, the chittavrittis are always known to it. Okay. Of course, one can also think in the other term, because the Purusha, the Vishaya is always known to it, it does not undergo any changes. Right? So it's a good way to think about it from both sides. Now Vyasa says in the Bhashya, yadi chittavat prabhurapi purushah parinameta tatah tad vishayah chittavrittayah shabdādi vishayavat jñātājñātāः syuh. The Vyasa says, is similar to the chitta, yadi chittavat prabhuhu purushah api parinameta. The Lord Purusha also was changing and undergoing transformations. Then tatah, due to that, tad vishayāścittavṛttayah. So the Vishaya for that, for the Purusha, which is the Cittavṛttayah, which is with respect to the Cittavrittis, similar to the Shabda and such Vishayas, the Cittavrittis will also be jñātājñāta, sometimes known and sometimes unknown. However, that is not the case. So, sadā jñātatvam tu manasah tat prabhoḥ puruṣasya apariṇāmitvam anumāpayati. So, one can infer that the chittavrittis are always known to the Purusha, because the Purusha is unchanging. Now, interestingly, this sentence can also be read as, because the chittavrittis are ever known to the Purusha, one can infer that it is ever unchanging. Okay. So, what is being said is that now we just saw through the discussions of how the Bauddha Matam, the different types of other opinions on how the chitta gets to know the world and whether the world has its entities in the world have their own existence or not. All that was discussed, and then we arrived at what is the cognition process? How does chitta really perceive things? And then we saw that the chitta undergoes transformation by getting colored by different objects, which becomes the known and unknown respectively. And then we go one step ahead. They say with Purusha that is not the case. Purusha's Vishaya is chitta alone, and the chitta is always in the known category to it, and the Purusha is completely unchanging. In the Tattva Visharati it is said, Chittam anirodhat sarvada purushena anubhuyate vrittimat. So the Chittam, which is vrittimat, the chitta that has vrittis in different states, anirodhat, until the point of nirodha, the complete restraint of the chitta, sarvada, always, purushena anubhuyate, is experienced by the Purusha. Tatkasya hetoho, how can you say that? For what reason? Yataha, because Purushaha aparinami parinamitve chittavat purushopi jñātājñāta vishayo bhavet. Because the Purusha is aparinami, unchanging. Had it been parinami, had it been changing, then the chitta vritti would also be known, unknown, etc. at different times. ज्ञात विषय एव तु अर्थः तस्मात् अपरिणामी ततश्च परिणामिभ्यो अतिरिच्यते इति. However, the artha for the Purusha, which is the chitta, is always known. Therefore, the Purusha is aparinami, does not undergo changes. And therefore, parinamibhyo atirichyate. It transcends the entities that are of the nature of transformations and changes. The Purusha transcends them. It is ever unchanging and therefore entirely different from anything else in creation. So that is what is getting established here from the aspects of the knowledge process and the nature of reality. And that is Sutra 4.18 and its Bhashya.
So in the part of Cavill, the argument was that it should either the object should be all the time visible or all the time invisible, all the time known or all the time unknown. So Patanjali takes a clue from there and proceeds to come back to his track of discussion on metaphysics. He says the chitta is parinami, therefore it will sometimes know and sometimes not know. It has to get colorized. When it gets colorized, there is perception, cognition, etc. When it doesn't get colorized, there is no perception, cognition, etc. So chitta will be colorized. That means it will be changing colors. Different colors will come to chitta in the form of different objects as supports of perceptions. And therefore, the chitta is constantly parinami, constantly changing. However, with reference to Purusha Tattvam, it is always knowable, always known. So therefore, Purusha Tattva, because these Buddhistic philosophers are refusing entity of Purusha in their postulation of momentarism and panpsychism, Vijnanavada, Kshanikavada, etc. They are refuting, they have a stand that something like Purusha Tattva doesn't exist. The eternal metaphysical principle, timeless metaphysical principle is refused by the Buddhas. So he takes opportunity to say that sadā jñātāścittavṛttayaha, that Purusha Tattva with reference to its chitta, which is only its object. The Purusha doesn't have objects of the five forms, Shabda, Sparsha, Rupa, Rasa, Gandha. Its object is always chitta and only chitta. And therefore he is ever knower. Ever knower. Sadā jñātāścittavṛttayaha. By being Prabhu, by being its master. Swaswami Sammadam was established earlier. So, That proves that Purusha is aparināmi. There is no change, it is changeless principle because it is ever knower. It is not sometimes it knows and sometimes it doesn't know its object. It will always know its object, which is only one object, that is its chitta. The chitta which is associated to it, subserving it, it always knows, and therefore Purusha is aparināmi, while the chitta is parināmi. And therefore he is also trying to bring that aspect which is rejected by these opponents, that there is ever existent principle. So the Purusha is there, Purusha is aparināmi, and Purusha is sadā jñātā. Therefore, you have heard in our discussions, the Purusha Tattva was discussed as Jnana Swarupa and Jnanādhara. Why do we know something? Why do we know all of those things? It is because Atma in us. It is Adhara. And Atma itself, Jnana Swarupa. It is substrate for all knowledge and it is of the nature of knowledge. So this was discussed while we were discussing Purusha Tattva earlier. The point is, between Purusha, the Swami, and the Chitta, the Buddhi, the Swa, the Purusha is ever knower. Now why it is ever knower? Because it is aparināmi. So sometimes an illustration is given here, such as a mirror, darpanam. The mirror is identified as mirror because it reflects. It is reflecting. So mirror will never cease from its being a mirror. Whether you see it is reflecting or whether you don't see that it is reflecting, the mirror is ever reflecting. Because that is its swarupa of the mirror. The swarupa of the mirror is to reflect. So even if you wrap it with a dark paper, black paper, jet black paper, it is going to reflect the jet black. It will not cease from reflecting. If you apply a coat of tar on mirror, it is going to be reflecting the coat of tar. The mirror will not cease to reflect. As long as it is mirror, the mirror is going to reflect. If the mirror becomes just a glass and ceases to be mirror, it will not be reflecting and therefore it won't be mirror. So mirror always reflects. Mirror doesn't have the state of reflecting and non-reflecting. That mirror doesn't say I will reflect between these hours and I will not reflect within these hours. It always reflects. That's why it is mirror. Similarly, here the Purusha Tattva has its object all the time shining for it. Because Atma doesn't have state of sleep. We have a state of sleep and therefore we will not see what is around us. But the Atma Tattva doesn't have Jagrat, Sapna, Sushupti, Avastha. It is not in those states. So it is aparināmi. And because it ceaselessly knows its object constantly, absolutely constantly, it is aparināmi. That proves that it is aparināmi as well. So let's again we embark upon the metaphysical position that Patanjalas are holding about the Purusha Tattva as sadā jñātā, Purusha Tattva as aparināmi, Purusha Tattva as nitya. So these are the postulations of Patanjalas about Purusha Tattva. So he takes advantage of the argument that was posted by opponents. It gets back to the track of his subject matter. That is Patanjala's subject matter, and reiterates that Purusha Tattva is aparināmi and the Purusha Tattva is sadā jñātā, of its one object, only object, which is chitta, which is called swam, and he is swami. So relationship between Swa and Swami is also reiterated in the process. Okay.
Okay, so we have seen Sutra 4.18. We'll stop here for today and continue further in the next session. So let's decide shlokas and Guruji and stop for today. Vaijñānikam pravaktrutva आसनेषु कलाविदम् योगाभ्यासे च तत्त्वज्ञं वन्देऽहं सुन्दरं गुरुम् योगवृक्षो हि लोकेऽस्मिन् यत्प्रेरणेन वर्धितः योगाचार्यगुरो तुभ्यं सुन्दराय नमो नमः. Thank you.
Namaskar all of you.